The simulator room buzzed with low chatter and the hum of idle monitors. Young pilots leaned against the wall, sipping vending machine coffee and trading jokes as if nothing serious ever happened in that corner of the base. Then the door clicked, and the room shifted. She stepped in like she had every right to be there. A woman in a faded mechanic's jacket sleeves pushed up grease on her hands. Nobody moved at first. One lieutenant smirked, muttered something under his breath, and the others laughed. She walked straight to the console and asked for sim time. The instructor blinked, checked the schedule, then looked her up and down. Her name wasn't on any list. She wasn't even listed as flight crew. She didn't argue. Just stood still, calm, waiting. The silence grew uncomfortable. One of the lieutenants leaned over, said something about janitors playing pretend. Still, she said nothing. Finally, the instructor sighed and gave her 2 minutes in a solo scenario. No prep, no intel. 5 hostiles, 1 Apache. He didn't expect her to get airborne. The simulator doors closed, the screen came alive, and the Apache lifted smooth and sharp, moving like it had a mind of its own. Within seconds, the radar lit up, and she was already positioning for terrain masking, dropping low between digital hills. No one said anything. The laughter stopped. The first missile hit dead center, then another, and another. She eliminated all 5 targets in under 90 seconds. When the pod opened, she stepped out with no change in expression, no swagger, just the same quiet confidence she walked in with. Behind her, no one laughed anymore. All they could do was stare and wonder. Who the hell is she? Eden Vale never raised her voice. At 38, she moved through the helicopter hangar like she belonged to the shadows. The kind of person you'd pass in a hallway and forget by the time you reached the door. She wore the same navy blue coveralls every day, sleeves rolled just below the elbow grease, darkening the fabric around her wrists. Her boots were scuffed, her hair always tied back in a tight knot, and there was a small wrench clipped to her belt that never left her side. If she ever smiled, no one saw it. People knew her as the one who worked late, the one who didn't take lunch breaks, the one who could get a bird flight ready faster than anyone else without ever asking for help. She didn't talk about her life outside the base. No one knew where she lived or what she did after hours. Most assumed she had no one waiting for her. The machines trusted her. That's what one of the senior techs used to say, half joking but half in awe. Eden had a way of listening to the low hum of a turbine or the stutter in hydraulic flow and knowing what it meant. She touched engines the way some people held newborns. Gentle, focused, unafraid. She never interrupted conversations. Never corrected mistakes even when she knew better. Once a younger mechanic torqued a joint too hard and cracked a stabilizer bracket. She fixed it without saying a word, then left the file open just enough for someone to find the truth on their own. Most people didn't see her at all. Officers barked orders past her. New recruits assumed she was just another civilian support tech. A few respected her work but couldn't remember her name. She didn't mind. Or if she did, she never let it show. Eden moved with quiet purpose, the kind built from years of repetition and resolve. There was a softness to her when she worked alone. Like the world slowed down just for her to calibrate the perfect balance in a rotor system or align the thermal sensors by touch. She whispered to metal like it could hear her, and maybe it could. Sometimes in the early morning when the sun cracked over the desert horizon, you'd find her standing beside a bird she'd rebuilt from scrap, just standing, breathing in the stillness. No one ever asked what she was thinking. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She didn't need to. Her value wasn't in her file. It was in the way the machines purred under her hands and how not a single one ever failed under her watch. That was Eden Vale, the quiet one, the one you didn't see until it was too late to forget her. Fort Raven operated like clockwork, a place where every step had a reason and every uniform carried a story. The sun rose over rows of concrete and steel, and the sound of boots on tarmac never stopped. Rank was everything here. Pilots moved with swagger-clipped badges gleaming under their flight suits. Commanders barked orders into radios as if the world needed to bend around them. Salutes snapped sharp and eyes followed stripes more than faces. In this ecosystem of protocol and posture, Eden Vale didn't fit. She walked through the base like background noise, never out of place, never belonging. Her coveralls didn't shine. Her boots weren't new. The hangars echoed with metal and noise, but No one raised a voice for her. She wasn't addressed unless something was broken. Most days, even then, they handed her the task without looking up. The officers' lounge had polished floors and walls lined with commendations. Eden had never set foot inside. She ate at the edge of the loading dock legs, dangling her sandwich wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. No one joined her. Promotions were celebrated with plaques and handshakes. Recognition passed in meetings and ceremony. Eden had fixed more birds than any team in the last 5 years, but her name was never read aloud. Her presence unsettled some, but not for the reasons they thought. She worked with a focus they didn't understand. She didn't seek approval or complain about late shifts. She didn't ask for favors or trade in gossip. The base ran on clear rules. You followed the chain of command, you earned your bars, and you were seen. Eden broke none of those rules. She just lived outside them. To the enlisted men, she was the ghost in the hangar. To the officers, she was the contractor with the good hands. No one asked how she knew so much. No one asked where she learned it. They saluted the emblem, not the person. They trusted the patch, not the eyes behind it. In a place that ran on visibility, Eden remained invisible by design. But the machines noticed her, and someday that would matter more than stripes. The simulator building smelled like cold air and burnt circuits. It was a place where young pilots sharpened instincts, tested reflexes, and showed off whenever an audience was near. On that morning, 4 of them stood near the vending machines, half sipping coffee, half scanning the roster screen. One of them laughed when Eden Vale walked through the glass doors. She didn't make eye contact, just moved with the same steady pace clipboard under her arm boots, silent on the tile. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. The lieutenant in the corner nudged his buddy and whispered something about her being there to clean the joysticks. Another tilted his head toward her and smirked, already dismissing her existence. None of them lowered their voices enough to hide the mockery. Eden didn't flinch. She walked past them, eyes forward, as if the words had never landed. But they did. The room had turned colder, and the weight of their assumptions filled it with static. She stopped at the check-in desk where Major Tilden was reviewing sim logs. He didn't look up at first. Just mumbled that civilian access was restricted and asked who she was shadowing. She told him she wasn't shadowing anyone, just wanted 2 minutes of sim time. No prep. Solo run. That made him pause. He looked her over slowly, eyes narrowing at the lack of any patch or badge. He scanned the trainee list again and then shook his head, said she wasn't even cleared for observation, let alone engagement. Eden held her ground, not defiant, just present, like this was a routine she'd been through before. The major sighed and turned toward the others. One of the lieutenants raised his eyebrows and grinned, said something about letting the janitor have a go. Tilden hesitated, then shrugged. 2 minutes, he said. Solo canyon strike, 5 hostiles, no pre-brief. The others laughed again. One even made a mock bet about whether she'd remember which button started the engine. Eden didn't respond. She stepped into the pod, closed the hatch, and disappeared from view. Silence returned, but not for long. The big screen flickered, loading the simulated terrain. The timer started. At first, nothing moved. Then, without warning, the Apache lifted. Not clumsy, not tentative. The bird moved like it had flown 100 missions. Its pitch and throttle synced like muscle and breath. The officers watching leaned forward. One of them frowned. She dipped low between 2 ridges, radar quiet throttle barely above stall speed. She was masking her position using terrain, a Tier 1 tactic most rookies didn't even understand. The smirks faded. No one spoke now. Every maneuver was precise, clean, like instinct was guiding her hand. She didn't just shoot. She predicted. The first hostile exploded in a plume of smoke before the others registered, then 2 more within seconds. She circled the last 2 targets like a hawk, pulled back, and finished the sequence in under 90 seconds. The room held its breath. The screen went black. A beat passed. Then the pod door opened. Eden stepped out exactly the way she'd gone in. Calm, shoulders steady, clipboard still tucked under her arm. She didn't glance at anyone. Didn't ask how she did. She simply walked toward the exit as if none of it mattered. But it did. Behind her, no one laughed. No one spoke. They just watched, stunned, as the quiet mechanic vanished down the hallway like a ghost slipping back into the walls. The screen lit up with desert terrain, jagged cliffs casting long shadows over narrow canyons. The Apache sat still at the simulated LZ rotors, idle sunlight bouncing off the fuselage. No briefing, no countdown, just silence, and the blinking red of 5 hostile targets waiting in the corners of the map. Inside the pod, Eden flicked on the systems with fluid motions. Her fingers moved across the console like she wasn't thinking, just remembering. Engines spun up. Avionics alive. Radar pulsed once and locked in. The bird lifted with a low whine nose, tipping slightly to the right, altitude steady. She pushed the collective gained airspeed and dipped low before the first waypoint even flashed green. The simulated air shimmered with heat terrain folding around her like muscle memory. In the observation room, no one said a word. The young officers who had just mocked her stood frozen. One of them leaned in, eyes narrowing as if trying to spot the trick. She used the terrain like a shield, dropped into a shallow valley, cut throttle just enough to stay masked, and coasted under radar. Most rookies stayed high and fast. She went low and invisible. The first target was a moving convoy along a ridge. She approached from the blind side, nose tilted just enough to bring the cannon into view. No hesitation. One burst. The target exploded. The second and third were spread wider. She banked left, let the rotor momentum carry her into a lateral drift, and fired off a pair of Hellfires in sequence. Both hits. Zero correction needed. Someone in the room muttered something, but it didn't register. The sim timer blinked past 42 seconds. The fourth target shifted into a flank position, baiting an approach. Eden ignored it. Instead, she climbed just enough to fake a retreat, then looped back under cover, came around on the blind side, and tagged it with a side burst from the 30 millimeters. Clean. Controlled. The fifth tried to run. A fast jeep winding down a dry wash, barely visible on thermal. She trailed it for a breath, let the terrain do half the work, then lined up a soft lock and fired one missile just ahead of its path. It vanished in a cloud of dust and flame. 91 seconds. The screen froze on black. Simulation complete. All 5 hostiles eliminated. No damage to her bird, no wasted ammo. The silence in the room grew heavier. Major Tilden stared at the readout, blinking like he'd forgotten how to speak. One lieutenant took a step back without meaning to. Inside the pod, Eden shut down the systems with the same quiet grace. She stepped out without looking around. No victory smile, no comment. Just the same focused eyes and the quiet thud of her boots on tile. She passed the group slowly, like walking through fog. They parted without a word. No one asked what she had done. They had seen it. What lingered now wasn't confusion. It was realization. They had laughed at her. But now they understood. She had flown like someone who knew more than they did, who had lived it, who had earned it. Not in a sim, but out there somewhere they'd only trained for. The shift wasn't just in how she moved, it was in how they saw her now, not as the mechanic in coveralls, but as someone they couldn't define anymore. Someone who didn't need permission to prove who she was. The hum of the simulator still echoed in her chest long after she left the building. Eden walked back to the hangar, the same steps, the same rhythm, but something inside had shifted. She kept her eyes ahead, but her mind drifted. It had been almost 10 years since the desert in Kandahar. The sky then had been bone white, the air too still, like even the wind was holding its breath. Her bird had taken off full and come back bleeding smoke, half a rotor missing and one seat empty. She could still feel the pull of the collective, the weight of every decision dragging against her ribs. There had been a moment mid-flight when they lost comms, when she knew it would come down to her hands and nothing else. The man beside her, the one she trusted more than anyone, had taken a hit. He didn't scream. He just looked at her. They called it a failed mission in the report, classified the outcome, redacted names, but she remembered it all. The dust, the fire, his voice right before blackout, telling her not to go back for him, telling her to fly. She had flown, gotten the rest of them out. But it didn't matter. When the debrief came, they stripped the record, wiped her clearance, told her to stand down for good. No trial, no honor, just silence. After that, she disappeared. Let the world forget her, changed her name, took the contractor job because it was quiet. Machines didn't ask questions. They just needed care. For years, she kept her head down. Watched rookies stumble through sim drills she'd once run blindfolded. Watched officers assign ranks to people who'd never seen real combat. She didn't argue, didn't correct them. It wasn't worth the fight. Some called her a ghost. She never denied it. Ghosts don't need validation. They remember they carry and they endure. She'd learned that humility wasn't weakness. It was armor. The kind that didn't shine, didn't boast, just protected what mattered. And what mattered was still flying, still listening, still knowing when to step in not for praise but for someone else's chance to live. That's why she walked in silence. That's why she never fought to be seen. Because part of her still lived in that broken Apache, dragging home a memory that never landed. The alarm echoed across the base like a thunderclap. A recon team had gone silent near the Ridgecom's dead last GPS ping in a kill zone. The map showed 3 enemy pickups converging fast. Inside the hangar, voices clashed. Pilots scrambled. One was grounded with a med waiver. Another hadn't flown outside a sim in months. The only bird ready was the Apache Eden had rebuilt herself. She stood in the corner, already moving. No hesitation, no raised voice. Just grabbed her headset and walked toward the skids. A young officer barked that she wasn't cleared, told her to wait for authorization. She didn't stop, just climbed into the cockpit and began her checks. Fuel, hydraulics, nav sync. Everything was green. She knew this bird better than she knew her own name. Every bolt had passed through her hands. The base commander stormed in, eyes wide, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. She pointed to the screen. There were men out there. No one else was ready. The Apache was. He started to say she wasn't qualified. She pulled the collar of her coveralls just enough to show the ink below her neck. One glance shut him up. Ghost insignia. Black Ops. A mark not found on any base file. The commander stared, then lowered his voice. Asked if it was real. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Just slipped on her gloves and keyed the rotors. The sound changed everything. The engines roared to life, blades slicing through hot desert air. Technicians backed away. Officers stared. The tarmac cleared as she eased the collective. The Apache lifted like it had been waiting. Dust curled beneath the skids. She rose, banked left, and took off. Radio chatter tried to follow her. She cut the feed, switched to a private channel, called for the chase bird to form up. They followed, hesitant at first, then fully committed. Her lead was steady, her voice calm. She called out altitudes, terrain, wind shift. They passed waypoint 1, then 2. Below them, the desert twisted in jagged lines, sun throwing shadows across the rocks. Thermal picked up faint heat near the last ping. Smoke. She dipped, eyes scanning. There was the Humvee wedged against a dry outcrop. Silent. Crippled. She circled once, ordered the second bird into orbit, set her own angle of approach. The moment her wheels kissed the sand, the crew chief jumped out, gun ready, moved fast. Eden stayed locked on scope. 2 hostiles flanked from the ridge. She tracked them, fired short bursts, warning shots, close enough to shake their nerves. One dropped his rifle and ran, the other froze. Eden shifted just enough to block line of sight from above. The crew loaded the wounded. One man couldn't walk. Another was barely conscious. Chase bird called green. They were ready. Eden throttled back, lifted clean nose up, gained altitude. As they cleared the last ridge, enemy fire rattled behind them. Too late. She was gone, moving fast, holding steady. The Apache sang beneath her, tight, alive. She felt the weight of it all and didn't blink. 5 minutes later, the landing pad came into view. Med teams rushed to meet them, stretchers out, the wounded safe. She touched down soft. Skids kissed concrete. Engines spooled down. Silence crept in. Around her, the base gathered. Officers, techs, grunts who hadn't looked her in the eye all year. Now they watched her step out like they'd never seen her before. Eden didn't speak. Just pulled off her helmet, handed it to the commander, and walked past him. She didn't need permission to fly. She never had. The rotors slowed as the Apache settled back onto the pad. Dust rolled beneath the skids, lifting into the warm dusk air before falling quiet. Eden powered down the systems, her hands moving with the same calm that had carried her through the canyon. Medical teams swarmed the chase bird. Stretchers moved. Voices called out vitals. The wounded were alive. That was all that mattered. Eden stayed in her cockpit a second longer, letting the hum of the machine fade around her. When she stepped down, the base had gathered. Technicians, pilots, command staff. Even the men who once laughed at her stood still, their faces unsure, their silence heavy. Colonel Braddock pushed through the crowd. He had flown enough to know what it took to pull off what she just did. His eyes locked on hers as she approached, then dropped to the side of her neck. A breeze caught her collar just enough to shift it. There it was. The tattoo. A dagger threaded through twin rotors. Simple. Precise. Deadly. The mark of a pilot from Ghost Squadron, officially disbanded, unofficially never acknowledged. He froze. Recognition hit him like a punch to the chest. Years ago, he'd served on an operation that went sideways. His squad was saved by a pilot who never gave her name, just a call sign and a silhouette in a warbird. That mark was burned into his memory. He said her name softly. Not Eden, the old one. She didn't deny it, just stood there the last light of the day catching her eyes. He turned slowly to the others, said they had just watched a legend take flight. His voice was low, but it carried. No one challenged it. No one dared. The crowd shifted. Someone whispered that she was one of them. The stories that had floated around bars and barracks for years had a face now. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was real. Braddock looked at her again and said it out loud. Effective immediately, she was reinstated. Flight status. Full access. Lead on Apache operations. No objections. There were none. She nodded once. No smile, no emotion, just acceptance. Quiet and absolute. The tattoo stayed visible after that. She didn't cover it again. Not out of pride. Not for attention. Just because hiding it had never saved her. And showing it now told the truth better than any word ever could. Later that night, a young tech asked if she had really flown in Black Zone missions. She didn't answer. Just handed him the diagnostic tablet and pointed to a calibration error he had missed. By morning, her name was back on the roster. Her old call sign was whispered in respect. Echo 1. The woman who flew when no one else could. The woman who returned when others didn't. And now, no one mistook her for a mechanic again. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the flight line. Eden walked alone. Helmet tucked under one arm, her steps quiet against the concrete. Behind her, the Apache sat still, its frame golden in the last light of day. The hangar lights buzzed to life as the base shifted into evening rhythm. Engines cooled, boots shuffled, radios crackled softly. But no one spoke to her as she passed. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Near the edge of the pad, a young pilot stood watching. The same one who had laughed when she entered the simulator. His mouth moved like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. She met his eyes once, steady and calm, then kept walking. Nothing about her posture had changed. Same quiet grace, same pace, but everything around her had shifted. She no longer had to explain who she was. They already knew. They didn't salute. She didn't expect them to. What mattered wasn't the patch or the title. It was the silence that followed her, now filled not with doubt, but with belief. She reached the far end of the tarmac and paused. The sky stretched open above her, wide and endless. A breeze lifted her collar, cool and sharp, brushing past the tattoo she no longer covered. Her voice came low, more to herself than anyone else. Just 7 words, simple, final, and the kind of truth that didn't need echo. They didn't believe me, but I flew anyway. Then she kept walking, and behind her the base stood a little taller,